Meet PitchDB, the ultimate platform for speakers looking to make their mark on podcasts, conferences, and media outlets. PitchDB provides access to over 3 million platforms, ensuring you find the perfect avenue for your message. With AI integrations, your bios and pitches are tailored uniquely to each opportunity, giving you the edge you need. Join now at pitchdb.com.
Welcome to Your Brand Amplified, the podcast where we interview marketers, publicists, and brands to learn their stories, what makes them tick, and tips and tricks that make a difference. I am Annika Jackson with Your Brand Amplified, and I'm super excited to bring you Susan Coelius today. Susan, you are one of Fortune's most powerful women. You've been an emerging entrepreneur honoree for the most powerful women community, and you have quite a diversified background, I guess would be the best way to share that and tease it to the audience. So thank you for being here, first and foremost. And before we get into what you're doing today, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about your background. You've been in the military, you've been a D1 soccer player, you've done so many different things. So how, what, when, where, why, and how did that bring you to where we are today?
I had a lot of fun in life, that's for sure. Yeah, I mean, I grew up as a serious athlete. Actually, a path that I don't know that I encourage as much on my children as someone that went down that path. Played a serious athlete at a pretty high level growing up, including and obviously into college, and then realized that professional soccer players for women were making $24,000 a year, and that just was not a career path that I was necessarily ecstatic about. So moved to San Francisco and started a company in 2005 with my brother, Zach. I guess you can say it was in the middle of the Great Recession or right before then. But it was really in a really unique time in San Francisco where I think all the startups in San Francisco could meet inside of like a one big party tent in the back of this guy, Mike Arrington's backyard. So it was a really neat time to be, learning about the tech scene and becoming kind of a tech entrepreneur. And we ran that business for about 9 years in San Francisco before selling it in 2015. And now I've started my next company where doing it a little bit differently, not raising any VC money, living a very remote lifestyle, have a remote team, have a global team. And it's really changed the way I think about building businesses and the way that I think about what's possible in life. And so pretty excited. And I think the theme behind all these is just this idea of, I guess there's sort of two core themes. One is just sort of growth and like iteratively getting better. Being as an athlete when I was playing a lot of different sports growing up, but really soccer was the one I went to school for. Growing a business and growing yourself personally is just kind of take that next step. Keep taking the next step and you end up at a pretty magical place.
Yeah. Well, what got you to say, you know what, I'm going to start this, I'm going to do a tech startup and I'm just going to move to San Francisco?
Well, I guess two big things happened. One is I got rejected from the final offers at Ogilvy One, which was, I would have moved to New York and done like a totally different trajectory. And I'm so thankful that I did because, in life you get to live in phases, right? And I really like to think about what those phases are. Now I'm pretty excited to start digging into some of the different work out there around how your brain exists within each of those phases. But when you're in the phase of being a 20-something, you have this super unique opportunity where you don't actually, unless you grew up, with a trust fund or having access to a lot of money, you don't really know what it means to have that much money. So it's easy to come out of college and kind of be poor. You don't have like real responsibilities in terms of, this is the average, right? Obviously there's derivations from this, but most 20-somethings like graduated from college. Hopefully you make good decisions. We can talk about my crazy college trajectory. I graduated relatively debt-free and my parents did not pay for my education. So, I think that there's ways to do that that are unique and interesting, but hopefully you can be in a position where you're relatively like, I had some debt. I had like a few $100s a month of like school, debt that I had to pay, but it was relatively debt-free, didn't have any responsibilities, obviously didn't have any children, and could just sort of like live that hardworking lifestyle where your job is to learn who you are and learn, how to go after, exist in an industry. And I got pretty lucky. My brother, Zach, and I started a company in college together called Votes for Students. And we decided we did well together starting businesses. And so we started this next business together in San Francisco. And he actually kind of made the decision between New York and San Francisco. I was off traveling and he's like, I'm moving to San Francisco and I want to start a tech company, but you have to come and do it with me. And I was like, I just didn't get the job at Ogilvy. Like, that sounds good. And I'm so blessed and so lucky that I was able to spend my 20s really, not making any money, but working hard, using a lot of hours and really learning how to be an entrepreneur. And although our first company didn't end quite the way we wanted it to, it set us up, both of us up, really teed us up for the success at this next life stage where now we can be a lot more deliberate about the businesses we build. And my brother's actually become a very successful venture capitalist and just how we live life. And so using our 20s to like learn how we wanted to live life, who we are, what we were good at was just such an extraordinary opportunity.
Yeah. And thank you for sharing that journey. I grew up in Kansas and moved to Chicago and worked for a marketing firm, was a club promoter in my early 20s. I realized that I was making like $16,000 a year, no money, was figuring out my what next, figured out if I'm going to stay in Chicago or move. I ended up moving to LA, and I was actually in San Francisco right before you were working in the magazine publishing world. So I'm a little bit familiar with the scene. It wasn't quite blown up, right? Because this is like 99 to about 2004. So it was just really starting to get good. Yeah, right before you. So, but I love the fact that you were able to start something, figure out how you wanted to structure things moving forward and take this leap and move into something new. But what propelled that specific company when you started?
We had no business start that company.
Okay.
Like we just did it. Zach and I both in college, this was our last company called Trigget. In college, we started this company called Votes for Students, which was a nonprofit we tried to use the internet and email to get out the college vote. And, I think entrepreneurship is just a series of looking into a blank slate and saying, how do I get to that point out there in the distance that I think I see and I think I want to get to? And Votes for Students for us was such a good opportunity to just say, okay, well, what do we need to do? And try to draw that map out and then try to figure out how to achieve it. And I spent an entire summer calling college registrars' offices, convincing them to give us the email list of their student population, which they'd have to send us on like a floppy disk. And there was this law that said like colleges have to help students vote. So I'd be like, if you send us this list and we send your students emails, then you're now in compliance with this law. And that was my summer, right? Like cold calling like college registrars' offices. And then we got this big list, right? We got about, I think at the end we had almost 500,000 email addresses for college students. You can't do this anymore. This was in 2000.
I know. I'm like, wow.
2002, I think. This was into the 2002 election. And then, my brother Zach was calling and trying to raise money. So all summer long, he was just cold calling, like trying to raise money for this nonprofit. And we raised $5,000 and then we raised $10,000. And then we had this big email list. And so then we got a grant from the Pew Charitable Trusts for $300,000 to run the project. And so I think it's just that iterative, just keep going. One of my favorite quotes is about the stone cutter who back in the day would just pound the stone, pound the stone, pound the stone, and you'd see nothing. And on the 500th pound, all of a sudden the rock would split in two. And I think like that is in so many ways what entrepreneurship is making the good decision around, where to hit the rock, like what's the wall you're going to run into. But it's so often it's just running into a wall over and over and over again. Hopefully you're like getting smarter every time you run into the wall. And then eventually you sort of break through and then you have a new wall you have to break through. And it's just that perseverance of constantly going and going and going. And then when you see something and when you break through, then you take that and scale as far as you can. And then you're going to run into new problems. And I think no matter what size your business is, as an entrepreneur, you're always going to run into new problems. And so just being comfortable with this idea that like, it's just a set of problems I have to solve. There's always going to be problems. There's never not going to be problems. And therefore, I'm willing to solve the problems that are in front of me. I think is really the mentality that I think has let me live the lifestyle that I'm living today, which is a pretty awesome lifestyle. And I have a very successful business. But every day, it's just like, keep going. Like just have the perseverance to keep going and trust that like I'm smart enough and I'm talking to enough people and I'm reading the articles and I'm doing the things that I'm going to continue to break through. And sometimes it's small wins and sometimes it's really big wins.
Yeah. It's such a good point though, because I think as entrepreneurs, you can get really overwhelmed with everything that you have to do. But if you think about it the way that you're talking, you just keep on breaking through one thing at a time, then it makes it feel more achievable, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Entrepreneurship is, it's interesting. I have a dear friend who's, I think, has been an entrepreneur, and I keep encouraging her to start another business or at least a consulting practice because she's so phenomenal. And she's like, yeah, but there's something magical about the security of a corporate job where I go to work from 9 to 5. I make very good money. It's very consistent. Like I want that. And she's got young kids. And I think that's okay too. And so for her, she finds her entrepreneurship she does intrapreneurship, where she's within that bigger corporation. She's saying, okay, well, how am I going to go do something interesting and transformational? So I don't want to glorify entrepreneurship too much. Ashley's really reminded me of, she's like, yeah, you hustle your butt off and I'm in this like relatively stable job, but I get to travel the world whenever I want and do whatever I want and not go to work whenever I want. And she doesn't. So I think, as much as I like to think of, I love entrepreneurship and I would encourage everyone who has that to go after it. It's okay to look at a life phase and say, you know what, right now it's going to be okay that I have a very stable job while I go through this phase of this part of my life.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And I think especially as women, and as you mentioned, mothers, it's that balance of like, which one do we need right now? But then you also have to balance, like if you're an entrepreneur, you might be working crazy hours, but you can shift it around your family dynamic too. You have to figure out what your pain point is, right? And what you're willing to sacrifice, whichever decision you make.
So one of the things that was really interesting for us at Trigit, so we were this tiny little company. In the end, we raised about $30 million from some leading venture capitalists and banks and whatnot. At our end, we'd raised a fair amount of money. But in the early days, we'd raised a couple $1 million. And we'd raised a couple $1 million. We were looking to hire young people because young people are cheap. And we had some very specific roles for them within Trigit around being kind of an analyst. And it was interesting to me because for every 10 applicants we'd get, 9 would be men and 1 would be woman. And I obviously wanted to have a lot of, as much sort of gender equality, diversity as we could within the business. But when you're a young company and you're moving fast, you also just have to hire the best people that you can at the speed that you can hire. And these were not for engineering roles. These were for like roles that really anybody, ideally you had some sort of econ background at least, or maybe a little bit of math or stats, but we just didn't see the female applicants. And so the one thing I do appreciate right now in my life is I think I can be in the position that I'm in today because I took some of those big risks and built that foundation when I was young. And I wish that I could encourage, and I always seek to encourage more young women in particular to take those risks while you're young. Do the things that are scary while you're young. Don't go do the corporate job when you're 22, right? Go work at a startup that only has 4 employees or 5 employees. And yeah, it might go under and you might have to go find another job in a year. But guess what? Like you're in a position when you're young that you don't have all these responsibilities, that you can do that and you can build that foundation, you can build that muscle. So that right now, I'm the breadwinner in our family. And, it was interesting, the month before my second child was born, the biggest deal that my company's ever had came in the door. And I was able to say yes and take that leap because I knew my team had me and that I could do it and that I could be resilient and it would be okay. But that's because I had all this practice in what is risk, what is resilience, how is this going to work out, what's the worst case scenario from when I was in my 20s when the risks, it didn't matter as much, right? So I'd say that is one of the biggest tips is if we think about life phases, it's going to be tougher to take the risks for the first time, right? When you're about to have children in your 30s. But for those people who are in their 20s, do it now, right? Go work at a startup or try to start a company or try to fail now because you're just going to build muscle. And then that muscle is going to make it a lot easier to take those bigger risks when you have responsibilities or you're entering this age of motherhood, which gets more nuanced and complicated, especially for women, right? It's tough.
Yeah, it is. So what was Trigit? Tell us what the company was, what it did, and then you sold it. And then now you have your new company, Force of Nature. So I'd love for you to talk about how they're different and what led you from one to the next.
Yeah, so we started an advertising company, Trigit. And like I said, we had no business starting the business that we were starting. And originally we were doing, and this is talk about pivoting. We pivoted so many times during those early years. And I think fundamentally, Zach and I just decided we wanted to start a company for all the reasons I just said, right? We were in our 20s. There was let's just figure it out. And obviously the hopes and dreams and things you aspire to were all there. So with Trigit, we originally started and we were going to hyperlink shopping links into web pages using different types of technologies. We built a small team. So there's 4 of us. Ryan and Bobby were co-founders at Trigit with Zach and I. And then we just pivoted around and we ended up being in a very sort of marketing technology. We were very early in the programmatic advertising space, helping companies like Home Depot and Best Buy and Booking.com get their data from their sites onto platforms like Facebook and Google. Facebook subsequently removed the need for businesses like Trigit. Now they just work directly with the brands, which is why we sold the business in 2015, because that was problematic to say the least. But I think we just sort of pivoted our way into this. It's tough to look back and really your vision's always 2020 looking backwards. It's hard to look back and like know whether we made the right decision or not the right decision, but we probably stayed in Trigget for too long. We probably should have. We had some opportunities earlier to get out and to sell the business at a much lower multiple. And we probably should have done that, because I think one of the things that would have happened or could have happened when we were younger is we just would have gotten more at bats, right? We would have had more opportunities to try other things. And clearly, Zach and I, this was then, we also had this like Olympics hustle we did. So we had done all this entrepreneurial stuff, growing up. And so clearly, like, we had this entrepreneurship in our blood. So I do think we probably stayed at a little bit too long. We probably should have got out of that business sooner. But we built a great team. We raised a lot of money. We really did the like traditional venture capital like thing. And it was really an incredible ride for us. The ending wasn't as glorious as we were hoping, but we exited. And our team really ended up, we had an extraordinary team who's ended up in really incredible companies all around the world. And so from that, I got a call a week later from my dear friend, Jamie Siminoff, who's was starting a company called Ring.com. And at the time, Ring was very small. And he said, "Hey, I need help." And I was like, "Absolutely not. I just sold my company. Like, I'm going to take a break." Like, no. And he goes, "No, I really need help. Will you come down for like a couple days and just help?" So I went down for a couple days, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, this is like product market fit to a T. Now you just need to scale it." And he's like, "Yeah, I need help." So I went and started doing some consulting work for Jamie and brought in one of the guys from Trigget, Mike Castoni, did a great job for Ring, really helped Ring grow. And it was like, whoa, this is a whole different side of the ballgame. I was I was a vendor at Trigget, right? Offering marketing technology services. Now I'm working on the client side, talking to vendors. And so I did that profile of work for a few years, and it was really cool to be able to pivot into that space. And I think that's another thing that's important is, especially for people who have a lot of experience, a lot of expertise, consulting is a great pause, right? Consulting is a great place to just take a deep breath, particularly if you have, a reasonably sized network, to take a deep breath and be able to see a lot of stuff in a short period of time. And, Jamie offered me an opportunity to come and join Ring, but I just wasn't ready to do that. I wasn't ready to like jump into the next thing. And so I helped a lot of great companies during that time and learned a lot about how different companies were being run and got to really come in and apply my expertise, but got to see so much. I got to work with John Levacy over at Blueprint. And then when he went over to the Pros Closet, got to do some stuff with him there. And I got to work with Kara Godin at Hint and just so many neat companies and seeing what they all looked like. And then decided to start another performance marketing shop out of the need that I saw within those businesses to really have this very quantitative approach to marketing, which is what Force of Nature offers. But I do think I think the consulting opportunity was just so awesome to just go out and see a bunch of stuff. And everyone's like, how do you get the clients? It's such a hustle to become a consultant and this and that. And I found that when I just told people I was consulting, they would tell other people I was consulting. And when you're a consultant, you don't need that many clients. I think I would have 2 or 3 clients at a time. And the average tenure was 3 to 6 months, right? For each client, maybe a little bit longer, maybe 9 months for some. But when I would tell people, oh, I'm doing this consulting work, I just got enough phone calls that I got enough clients, right? You just don't need that many clients in order for it to sort of flow and work. And so that, I really think if you want to become an entrepreneur, that is a great first step, is to identify the thing that you're an expert at, identify the thing that you're really good at, and just start telling everyone that you've been working with, hey, I'm going to start taking on some consulting clients. And it can be very lucrative. There is sort of a ceiling on consulting. I think eventually you hit where at some point they're like that you're making too much money and you just don't have time to do more than I think you can do 4 clients as a consultant doing this profile of work, but it's a great way to have a nice foundation. And then I started building Force of Nature while I was consulting, right? So I was able to sort of use the funding from my consulting work to start to seed Force of Nature and what we were doing. And Force of Nature really is just an agency. It started as an agency built on top of my personal consulting practice. How we're using the proceeds of the agency to productize and build things that, hopefully will scale more than an agency will scale. So we like to say everything's written in pencil. We don't know where we're going to be in 18 months. But, we can see what we think it could be, and we're going to kind of work towards that very iteratively. And it could change if we see something that's more exciting. But I think iteratively improve every day.
Performance marketing is such an interesting thing. I teach at USD Annenberg in a couple of programs, and one of them is digital media management. And we're always talking about the MarTech and the ad tech stacks and how things are changing with privacy laws or third-party cookies, or making sure you're being equitable with your marketing concepts. And then all the things that are happening with if Meta changes their algorithms and, all of those things. So I imagine those are things that you have to really stay on top of for your clients and just for your own knowledge. But in the whole world of thousands or hundreds of thousands of MarTech stacks and technology out there. How do you get through that? And what recommendations do you have for people who are looking to scale using performance marketing and trying to find the right stack for themselves?
So as we all know, like what's the hot subject that exists in the world today is AI. AI. Well, all of these technology stacks have been using AI. And so what is AI, right? So AI is this ability for computers, like in the most simple form, right? Computers to use data to make decisions in the most simple form. There's all these models now around how computers are using data to make decisions or lead to the next output or whatever that is. But it's just using an input to make an output, right? And the computer doing that work versus a human doing that work. AI has been driving the major ad platforms and the major media platforms for quite some time. And in the same way that we get iteratively better, they get iteratively better as well. And so, it used to be that there was this growth hacking, growth marketing, black boxy stuff that you would do inside of these platforms. You'd want to find some wizard that could figure out how to identify the right audiences against the right geographic targets, against the right bids. And it'd be this big, wiggly woggly. That doesn't exist anymore. Right? The algorithms inside of these platforms have gotten strong enough that if you're a marketer, the most important thing that you can do. So I think if we're thinking about the world of sort of marketing technology, the most important thing that you do is have clean inputs into the platforms so that they know what you're trying to achieve, and then they will try to achieve that for you. And we don't see clean inputs anywhere. So this is really where we focus a lot at Force of Nature, is helping companies build that roadmap for how do I really structure my entire marketing stack so that I can have a conversation, a data-driven conversation with these algorithms. So what does that mean, right? Okay, so I got to have clean inputs. I got to make sure my data is being piped correctly into these platforms. Well, that means you have to understand who your customer is and what the value of your customer is. So you have to know, okay, well, how much am I willing to pay to acquire a customer, right? And then I have to push that value in. And you may have different types and different cohorts of customers that have different values. So you have to push that information correctly into the platforms so that it can try to go find more people that look like that can deliver that same value out. And so today, I always say it's tough because so many people that are marketers, particularly sort of my age group, majored in marketing because they don't like math, right? Or they don't like engineering. And today marketing is math and it's engineering, right? It's all code based and it's all data. And so, and I think the good news is the data is relatively simple. If you're smart, right, and you can do sort of high school math, you're going to be able to figure out how to understand some of these types of sort of equations or whatnot. But it is becoming all about big data and asking questions against your data so that then you can push that information effectively into the platforms and say, hey, we want to go acquire people that look like this, and here's how much we're willing to pay for that. And you literally just push it into the platform, and then the AI engines are just getting so good that they're going to go out and find. We find on Facebook often the best way to target is just a broad target where you're like, okay, go talk anyone in the US. But you have to remember that the reason this works is Facebook has their pixels, right? Facebook has their knowledge on almost every website on the internet. Google has their stuff on every one of your emails if you go through the Google ecosystem. They have so much data that as an individual marketer, you can't compete with what they know. They know when someone's credit card is out and that person is shopping and making purchases. They know all of this, and they've built it into their algorithms so that when someone shows up on Facebook, if they're on a shopping spree, Facebook will then try to put the best ad in front of them to make a transaction or make a purchase against that product. And so the best thing that you can do is be honest with the platforms, put your data in them accurately, and have those things be a reflection. Make sure everything is piped. Make sure you're capturing the right data so that when you're asking questions against that data, the answers are actually accurate. So your event pixels are correct, things like that. But the goal is for you to be able to pretty confidently say, if I put $1 in the slot machine, I need to get $3 out. And I'm going to keep putting dollars in the slot machine until I stop getting $3 out. And then when you stop getting $3 out, right, when your ROAS falls below whatever the goal is, 3, you say, okay, that's my capacity right now. And then you can move on to other places like, okay, let's try to lean into can we tell the story a little bit differently? Can we improve our creative? Or can we, improve the on-site experience? Or can we improve places in other ways versus just your performance marketing?
Thank you for that. I appreciate you kind of walking through, because I think there are some people who are listening who really understand that world and more people listening who don't and aren't necessarily on that side of marketing or communications work strategy.
Well, I really believe that today that about 35 to 40% of performance marketing is just a black box held by the platforms. It's just pushing the data into those boxes successfully. Then I would say like about 35 to 40% of it is creative in the story you're telling. You have to have a good story and it needs to resonate with your audiences, and you need to be showing and showcasing, things correctly and accurately. And then the other, call it 20%. And it used to be, the ratios here used to be very different. The other, call it 20%, is in sort of your media operations and correctly executing against the campaigns. But you have to be operationally excellent. You have to get your campaign structured correctly. But it used to be that it's probably 50% was all around media operations and how you would run those campaigns. Now it's really like structure them correctly, feed the data in correctly, and don't touch them. Right. So, and then, focus on iterating in other places. And there's all sorts of creative approaches using, you can use UGC into influencers or having influencers there's all sorts of strategies around how you can increase these. But at the core, you need to have a very strong understanding, a very tight understanding of, what can I pay for a customer? And, if I then can go acquire as many of those customers as I can, and then can I afford that? Like, you got to run the finance in the background to really make sure that you understand all of those things.
Yeah. So I think so many people don't think about all the steps that it takes to get there, right? So a lot of what I do in my day job is we look at the qualitative and quantitative data. We look at demographics and psychographics, overlay them to see one of our clients' 4 or 5 different customer personas are going to be, then what's the common pain point, and then what's the theme, because we work a lot with adult education and workforce development. And then out of there, what is the campaign going to look like? I mean, it's really interesting to talk to clients about it because a lot of times they don't understand all the stuff that goes into that. And then how do we come up with the campaigns? And then how do you execute the campaigns properly? So,
well, and I think all the things that you just said, right? Like understanding at the core, who's your most valuable customer and what does that customer look like, right? And when you think about who that customer is and what they look like, then being able to pipe that value back into the campaign. So for example, if you're say this particular profile of customer or, is who I need to go after, make sure you're telling the platforms that information, but you have to understand that first. And then make sure that the ads that you're putting in front of someone is speaking to that customer so that you're able to really capture that customer.
Yeah. Which is why it's great to have an agency like yours. Somebody doesn't have to be an expert in all things. They can be an expert in their business and come to an agency to get the expertise that they need to successfully execute their campaigns and reach the right people. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's so important, right? Like, I always like to say, you're not going to take your car, right? If you have a Lamborghini, are you really going to open up the hood and try to do the work yourself? Right? Even if you just have like these days, any car, like I've got a minivan and like there was a battery problem and we were just like, you're not doing that work yourself. So I think it's so important to remind yourself that in the sophistication and the computer-driven outputs of these types of things, don't think that you should be an expert in the same way that like you're not changing your oil anymore. It used to be you would, right? And now you no longer are. And so you don't need to. There's experts that are out there whose job is to focus on that thing so that you can then be an expert at your job and what you should be focusing on, which is getting to know who your customer is and how to have a conversation with them. Because I think that is what's so difficult.
Absolutely. You mentioned that you get to travel, you have a lot of flexibility, you have a global team. Was it like that with Trigit as well? Or was that something you were able to weave into Force of Nature?
Yeah. So I think with Trigit, we were just a traditional funded San Francisco startup in the office, 9 to 5. I travel, into conferences, all that. When I started this next business, I think really what happened was I was doing my consulting work and I owned a home up in Lake Tahoe, California. And I thought I was going to have to move back to San Francisco. And I started consulting and I started being like, whoa, this is possible. The thing to remember is the remote tools that exist today are the worst that they'll ever be. Like, they're only going to get better, right? And so as I was building out sort of my team and my practice and realizing, oh, maybe this could work or maybe this would work. And then I think COVID just amplified it for us. I used to go visit my clients a lot. And now my clients don't want to see me. They're like, you're a vendor. Like, you're a very important vendor. You're a very important partner. But if I'm going to spend time in person, I want to spend it with my team inside the company. I don't want to spend it, having the person who's doing our media pitching me on whatever the next thing is. You can do that on the phone. And so I think that then that all of a sudden just opened up what's possible. I have a fully global team. We just try to find the smartest people in the world wherever they are. We use all these different asynchronous communication tools. So we can, we're using Loom and we're leaning hard into project management software and, we're doing all these types of things. And like, it's not only working today, but it's only going to get better. And so for me, it was a very deliberate decision to say, I'm not going to go and work at an office from 9 to 5 ever again. And what does that look like? Right. And, listen, I think the challenges of that are also very real. In Maui, I have this little like trailer that I work in outside the house, but like, I'm on a podcast and my kids know I'm out here and sometimes they knock on the door, right? Like, whereas when you're at an office, like you're insulated from that. And so I do think that your relationship with work changes as well. There's a lot of its incredible freedom and flexibility that comes with it, but there's also, and there's incredible opportunity to really find talent all over the world. Like there's a deficit of really great MarTech talent in the world. And there's a deficit of that talent in the San Francisco Bay Area in particular, because every company needs great growth people, right? Like everyone needs growth people. And if there's only so many people that do growth, but if you look throughout the world, there's more. Right. And often you can take advantage of that delta in price, where one of the big challenges, I think, in having a performance marketing shop or having any sort of agency type shop in general is the amount of work required is the same, right? No matter where the person is. But if the person is costing $250 an hour out of New York or San Francisco, you're going to get a lot less hours than if they're costing $65 or $70 out of, Poland, where my team's based. And so we can just fundamentally put more hours into the projects. And in putting more hours into the projects, then, we're going to get the output.
Yeah, you're going to get better results for your clients, and then they're going to want to re-engage.
Yeah. And I think that the tools just make it easy, right? Like it's just, I think that the tools really all of a sudden are making it very efficient. Like I said, using tools like Loom Video or using Slack or using whatever it is, your communication, and then really systematizing that, I think is a really important component. We lead, our stack is sort of this, Asana, Notion, Loom, Slack, which by the way, you're not paying for office space, but you're paying for an increasingly expensive tool stack. But then if you create systematic approaches to how you use those and how you enforce everyone using those, suddenly like you can start to have a really clean process and a really clean flow and really focus on that cycle speed of how we iterate and think through supporting our clients. And it works really well. Because I think that's the other thing with growth, like any kinds of growth, right? Is like you're going to create a baseline, figure out what that baseline is. And then you're going to just iterate on it, right? You're going to build, a test and learn approach that says, okay, well, here's what we think. Even if it's your LTV and you don't have clean data, you're like, well, I think it's right about here. Like, I think I can pay this much to acquire a customer. I would err on the side of be conservative at the beginning to make sure you don't go out of business while you're figuring all this out. But then you iterate on it, right? Then you say, okay, well, can I acquire a customer at that price on these platforms using these assets or using this approach? You use your best idea. And then you look at the data and then you try again and try again and try again. And if you grow, 1% a month, suddenly you've grown 12%, right? And you're like, like I know PE shops want 20%, but like, okay, so we got to grow like 1.5 a month. Like, and that approach just, I think, helps you grow. And that's a very process-driven way to think about things, which then all these tools let you do really well, which then change the profile of who you need to do that work.
You mentioned Maui, and when we were talking about having you on the podcast, I think it was right after around the fires in Maui. So I want to talk a little bit about that because you do work from Maui and California. And how is it there now? And what have you seen, happen?
I mean, I think the most devastating part of what happened to Lahaina is that, it was a working class neighborhood. Most of the people that were in Lahaina rented. You had a lot of multi-generational families, and that Lahaina got absolutely devastated. And, we see this happening in California as well, right? Like the Paradise Fire in California, like the Camp Fire took, same kind of thing. But in California, people could kind of like go out and move to Chico or kind of like go out and be able to go, well, we're on an island. And I think this is the thing that's the most scary and the most sad is you've got these, multi-generational families who have been on Maui or Hawaii and that are from Hawaii and from Maui who are now displaced. And there's no housing on Maui as it is. And now there's even less housing. And so it's really, I think we're entering this next phase where now the long term, like what are we going to do with all these people that have been displaced? And I don't know that there's good answers. And it's really scary for a lot of people. And that's the sort of crisis. But Maui's open, right? Maui's like, a town was lost, but Maui's open for tourism. It remains a beautiful island. It's an island that 70% of the economy is based on tourism. They want tourists to come. They want tourists to come and be respectful. So I think it's, I think Maui and Hawaii have a really big, long road ahead of them in terms of how to serve this community and how to serve these people. But the island wants people to come back, and it's pretty quiet here right now. So if anyone's been thinking about coming to Maui, like you can get good hotel rooms at good prices, and it's as beautiful and awesome as ever.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I wanted to mention it because I knew that was really important to you, to pour back into one of the communities that you live in and make sure that we're supporting them.
And the best way to do it is to come spend your money here. So it's like, I think that was this misconception that, nobody wants it. Like there's devastation that happened, but most people in Maui survive via tourism. And so the best way to support Hawaii is just to come and be a tourist and enjoy the magic that Hawaii has to offer.
Yeah. Let's talk about being a woman in tech, particularly going there in the very zeitgeist of tech. I know that today it's still not easy. I have clients who, are women, people of color, who still have trouble getting the right kind of funding and financing. But I'd love to hear about your experience and challenges you faced, how you overcome it. Because I feel like you also are a huge advocate for helping other women find their pathways in the tech community.
So the first thing I have to say goes back to what I was saying, which is take the jump in your 20s. So women in tech, just take the jump in your 20s. Because I think once you've got a little bit of experience and a little bit of a foundation, a lot more opens up, right? And so one of the things that we see happening is these young men take a jump in their 20s and they join a startup. They join maybe one startup, they get a little bit of experience, you're going to have a hyper growth. And I'm talking early stage. Don't go work for Google or Facebook, right? Go find a little 4 or 6 person AI company who's looking for whatever role and go and join them. That's the leap that I'm talking about. And then all of a sudden, you see these men roll out of those companies to start their own company, right? They went and they were at Snapchat for 6 years and now they start, the video augmentation company. So I think take the leap early so that then when you're still young and before you're having kids, you can do that. Because I do think that, all of the venture capitalists that I know want to just invest in the companies that are going to get them the most output and the most reward. I think a shining example we all should really look up to is Canva, right? And Mel is just a rock star and it's just built what a company, right? Oh my gosh. So I think that if you can show that you have a product that's scalable, that's backable, that's, venture backable, it's possible and you can get into those conversations. But I think that it's still a good old boys club, right? And this is one of the big problems is what do the dudes do when they invite each other on trips? They invite their buddies and they want to invite all the dudes and they end up with a trip that's all dudes. And then they talk about deals and they're like, oh, that's a good idea. I'm going to fund that deal. And so that continues to exist. And that continues to be, I think we don't know what doesn't exist, right? I remember once I went to a dinner, I walked in and it was 24 dudes and me. And I wasn't supposed to be there. At the last minute, my brother said, hey, I can't make it to this ad tech dinner. Can you go take my spot? And that was the thing that was really glaring because I wouldn't have known that there was a dinner with 24 dudes or 25 dudes because I wasn't even invited. And so I think, if you want to make change in your in tech, invite, I think diversity matters, getting more people into these opportunities so they can be exposed, so they can create the relationships, so they can create the networks, they can create the hustle. I think that's important. And I really seek to do that. But I think it's also more fundamentally, we need to get more young women taking the leap and taking the risk earlier in their careers. So then when they're at that next stage, when they're like, okay, I've been at this little startup for 3 years and they're looking and they're like, this isn't that guy's not that smart. This isn't rocket science. Maybe I should try this. They're in a position where they can do it at the right age and the right phase of their life.
Yeah, I think that's what we need more of. And I think one of the issues though is that, like you said, when you were getting those first resumes, 90% of them were men who were willing to take that leap. I think that it's part of the experience also, especially what I'm seeing now with students, is just building up their confidence that they can take a leap, that they can try something and not to be scared of putting themselves out there.
I don't recommend doing what I did and starting a company when you're 24. I think go join a young company, go do that. And I don't have business school in the back of your brain is the thing you need to do to get, because we have to think about life phases, right? Let's look at particularly for women, let's look at these life phases. When you're in your 30s, you're going to be looking for that partner so that then you can start a family so that you can have kids by your late 30s. This is the challenge that women have that men don't have. Yeah. Right? Dudes can wait another decade and do it when they're in their late 40s, right? They literally get a free 10 years. And so it's super important that as a woman, you're taking advantage of, call it those, 10 to 15 years in your 20s and early 30s, where you can take risks before you're in a position where it gets more complicated. Because I think once you have children, it does get more complicated. Luckily, I was able to build a great foundation. So for me, it wasn't really that complicated, right? I was able to take those leaps and make those risks because I felt good and confident and comfortable about it. I think it'd be very difficult to try to start a company and start a family at the same time if you'd never done it before, right? if it was your first time. And so do it in your 20s, like do it earlier. And I'd say if you haven't done it, you're like, I think I want to start a company, but I'm getting pregnant or whatever. I actually think that there's a really incredible opportunity to think about your children's school age years, right? And say, okay, if I think about my phases in my life, maybe I'm not going to start my company when I'm pregnant. There's always opportunities to start companies. The world will take your work forever. There will always be something. There's never like just a singular thing, right? So if you start to think about your kids' school age years, that's actually like a pretty structured time, right? Where you're like, the kids are like in school from like 8 to 3 every day, you know, and you could put them in after school if you want to for a little while. But that's a big chunk of time where you're going to kind of have like a pretty structured life and a pretty structured schedule. Even us living in 2 different places, like we're still on the school schedule. We're just on 2 school schedules. And so that's a time to say, okay, I think I want to start a company. I think when my kid enters kindergarten, like I'm going to go for it, because suddenly you've got 15 years, right? Like a company, like a successful company takes at least about a decade. So there's this nice window where you can kind of say, okay, I see what my next 15 years look like. Like I see what those school years look like. That's a good time, I think, to really, really lean in and lead.
Yeah. You just said a good company takes about 10 years to get really good, to get really strong and successful. That's really important because people need to think about it's a long game. Today, with everything going on, I think a lot of people are looking for that immediate gratification, no matter what they're doing, right? Whether they're using a more tech stack, or whether they're going to do digital advertising or PR strategies or start a company or whatever, that we're just living in this world where we expect instant gratification and instant success. And that's a fallacy.
It's a fallacy. It takes a decade. You go look at any company that's pulled it off and you look at their trajectory and it takes a decade. That's why funds are 10 years long, right? It takes a decade. You might see glimmers at 5 or 6 or 7 years that, okay, this is working, like this is going to hit, like we're good. If it works, and this was actually the problem with Trigget we had. It worked just good enough that we kept going, right? Like we were doing well enough. When we sold, we were doing, tens of millions of dollars in revenue. I think we're doing like 50 million in revenue or 42 million in revenue or something. Like there's big numbers, right? We weren't becoming a $1 billion company though, which is what a venture capital, like a venture return is looking for, is billions, right? And that took 9 years. If it's working, it's going to keep working and you're going to keep going and it's going to take a decade. And so as you're thinking about what you want to do and the company you want to build, like obviously if it doesn't work, maybe it doesn't take that long. Obviously there's outliers and you might get lucky. Make sure you're comfortable with what that looks like for the next decade, right? Because if it works, that's what it's going to take. And the other thing is the other very deliberate decision that I made with Force of Nature is I don't plan on raising any venture money. I use consulting to self-fund it into what it is today. And that was a very deliberate decision because it's letting me be on my schedule. As long as I'm supporting my family and building the business I want, we will get as big as we can under the constraints that we have. And so for me right now in the life stage that I'm at, it's super important that I spend time with my children, that we have dinner every night together, that I'm present for them, right? And that does not necessarily align with what venture wants out of their money that they're putting to work. They want people that are going to work harder than I'm willing to work right now. I've not written off ever raising money again, right? But in this life stage and this life phase, I don't want to do that because I own 100% of the business. I get to make the decisions that are best for the business and best for me. So just because venture money is dangling and it seems so shiny, like it doesn't mean that it's the right path for you or the right path for the business. If you don't need those dollars to grow, if you don't need those dollars to pour money on your fire, don't take them because it really is selling your soul and putting someone else in charge of your destiny, right? And so I think that for me was a very deliberate decision that is the best. And I actually, when I was first starting the business, I actually was talking to some people about maybe putting some money into a MarTech product that we subsequently didn't really work, so we didn't develop. Oh. And the best thing that we did was that we haven't raised that money.
Yeah.
And I think we get caught up in this fallacy that you need other people's money to build a business. Mm-hmm. You can just go build a business.
Yeah, that's very much.
No, it's profound.
Absolutely. Is there anything else that people listening right now should think about if they're thinking about starting a business, if they're thinking about getting involved in, performance marketing, if they're thinking about what their performance marketing looks like for their companies?
Well, if you need to talk performance marketing, shoot me a note. I'm happy to talk performance marketing anytime. I know a lot about performance marketing. So anyone needs help with that, you can get a hold of me at Force of Nature. But I think the more important thing is that as women, too often I see women are risk adverse. And I play a lot of extreme sports. I'm a kite surfer and a downhill mountain biker and a skier, and it's all men all the time. Each of these things is just a little step and then another step and then another step and then another step, and then you're doing it, right? So risk is just taking the first step. It doesn't have to be a big step. It can be a little step, right? And then the next step can be a little step. And then eventually they might get bigger and bigger and bigger. I think too many women are just afraid to take the first step. Let's stop being afraid of the first step. Figure out how to make the first step small enough so it's not scary, so you can take it. And that might just be like, I'm going to come up with a name for my business, or I'm going to build a one-page landing page on Wix, and I'm going to just dream about it. Like whatever that little tiny thing is, it doesn't have to be a big thing. Then suddenly you're starting to create this momentum. Oh, what should I do next? I've got a website. Well, I wonder if I can get anyone to come to my website, right? Little steps that create momentum. Eventually that ball will start to roll and roll and roll and roll. And if it starts to gather momentum, right, now suddenly you're going to start taking bigger steps and taking bigger leaps and taking bigger risks. So I think oftentimes we're just afraid to take the first step, and you got to take it. Don't die on the first step, right? That's the key. Don't die. Don't let your business die. So don't make decisions that will lead to that outcome. But I think that is so true of so many things in life. And I really hope that we teach our daughters that, and we teach our sons that. Testosterone helps. But we really focus on how do we practice taking risk in whatever small way we can, so that then we can start to take bigger risks and bigger risks and bigger risks. And really those big risks are sometimes the places where we're going to reap the biggest reward.
Yeah. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah.
I have had so much fun. I love your energy, and I'm looking forward to having more conversations in the very near future with you. Do you have one place that you'd like people to go to learn more from you, or learn how to work with you, or just be able to follow and see what you're doing and what you're up to?
So Force of Nature is at forceofnature.re. We did one of the cool, crazy, unique URLs, but you can find it as forceofnature.re. Or I'm generally available on the internet, just searching for Susan CK. I think on Twitter, I'm Susan CK. On Facebook, I'm Susan CK. On LinkedIn, I'm Susan CK. So Susan CK, generally available. Susan CK is my email address, but I'm generally findable and happy to chat with anyone who's out there.
Great. And do you have a family motto, a favorite quote, or some words of wisdom that you can share with us?
There's no rules.
Oh, okay.
Like in life, we all think that there's some set of rules that we all have to follow.
Yeah.
But there aren't any rules. You can live and you can exist however you can make it work for you and make it work for your family. And that mantra kind of rings true as we think about like how we raise our family and the type of experiences and adventures we want to go on, how we build a business. So I think we really try to exist with this idea of there's no rules, just don't die, right? As long as you're living, you can pursue a life that you want. And it's up to you to think about and brainstorm and be creative around what that looks like, and then go after it. We don't have to follow some set of societal constructs that says you must do X, Y, and Z and thus be here.
Yeah.
So I think that motto is one that we really try to live with. And obviously there's like nuance to no rules, but you get what I'm saying.
Well, I definitely think that you have taken that by storm.
Working on it.
Yeah. Awesome. Susan, thank you so much for being here and having this conversation with me. And thank you to my viewers and listeners for coming back for another episode of Your Brand Amplified. I'll be back again in a few days with another amazing expert for you. Until then, have a great week. Want more? Check out amplifywithannika.com or follow me on socials at amplifywithannika.